Hey, welcome to Try This from The Washington Post. Try This is a series of audio courses to help you take on common challenges and learn something new without having to make a big time commitment. I'm Christina Quinn, and I'll be learning with you per usual. And this time, we're going to get brainy, as in what we can do to keep our brains healthy and sharp, especially as you age. If you're new here, welcome. This course will have 3 classes, aka 3 episodes. First, we'll discover what happens to our brains as we age. Then, we'll learn what lifestyle changes can delay symptoms of cognitive decline. And lastly, we'll cover what stress can do to the brain and what we can do to mitigate those effects. Hint: breathe. Okay, class is in session. Let's try this. Before we get to what happens to our brains as we get older, it helps to understand what our brains were like when they were fresh and new. And then we can get to why I seem to forget where I left my phone every other hour. To help us with all of that, I called up my Washington Post colleague, Richard Sima. Or should I say Dr. Richard Sima? Richard, you're a neuroscientist. You're a journalist, but neuroscientist first. I mean, isn't it like once a neuroscientist, always a neuroscientist?
Yeah, I guess I'm always proud of my training, but I'm no longer dissecting brains for a living.
But you have a PhD nonetheless.
Yeah.
Okay, Richard isn't a medical doctor, but since he's actually held and seen a real brain before, and now writes about brain health and mental health in his column called Brain Matters, he's my go-to for anything having to do with the noggin. Richard, I just want to jump right to it. Could you just start off by explaining, what does a healthy brain look like?
Yeah, our brains are about 3 pounds, and a healthy brain, has very well-defined, beautiful grooves and folds. It's symmetrical. Its interior has these fluid-filled spaces that are not overly big. And they're, a healthy brain is devoid of signs of damage or chronic inflammation, scars, tumors, things that you don't want there. But basically, from the outside, what we can see is that this brain is helping you do what you need to do.
Okay, so groovy.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had to say it. The first thing that Richard reminds me is just how much my brain is doing all the time.
Everything from perceiving your senses, you're listening to my voice, is conceiving ideas, remembering the past, reasoning through something. You're navigating social situations, you're imagining possible futures, you're solving problems.
Basically, fellow learner, your brain is a cognitive marvel, constantly processing and filtering out sensory information, all the while running a slate of bodily functions. Our brains are made of billions of little tiny cells called neurons.
We have about 86 billion neurons. The average number of connections each one neuron makes is about 1,000. So it's very connected.
Neurons kind of look like little trees. Picture the main body of neurons being like the top of the trees, where the branches are. This part of a neuron makes up the gray matter. The branches receive information from other neurons, and the roots send information out, which makes up the white matter in the brain. And this system all connects with each other to form a web of electrical and chemical impulses.
In one sense, our brains never stop changing because, we're still learning things. And in order to learn something, it has to change. But, there are periods of development that we know of. So when we are born, we're actually born with more neurons than we have in our adulthood, about 100 billion, and then we lose about 15 million neurons to leave us with about 86 billion neurons.
Where do they go? Do they just die off like stars?
Yeah, they're sort of pruned off. And not only the neurons, but the connections that they form. We're given all these possibilities for what our brains need to do in the world. And as we're learning what's out in the world during the first few years of life, you're getting rid of the stuff that's extraneous, and you're sort of sculpting your brain to adapt to the life you have right now.
Interesting. How is it decided what we don't need?
Yeah, there is a sort of saying in neuroscience that neurons that fire together wire together. So neurons that are active together, it's you're sort of, when you're learning something new, you repeat it over and over again. You're sort of strengthening connections. And connections that you don't strengthen, stuff that you don't encounter repeatedly, are probably not important.
So, for example, that route you take to and from work or to school or the grocery store, that route is deeply baked into your brain's wiring because you've done it a bajillion times, and it's important to remember. And because you've done it a bajillion times, your brain has wired it in as important. It's a bit of a feedback loop. On the other hand, that long drive you make once a year for a reunion with old college friends isn't as baked in. And that's okay. You don't need to strengthen that neural connection to survive the rest of the year. Of course, there's all kinds of other stuff your brain decides you don't need to remember.
You probably won't remember like the color shirt I'm wearing a few days from now, right?
I mean, I might now that you brought attention to it.
Sort of reinforced it,
Yeah.
and so you won't prune it as quickly. But I don't think you'll hold on to that for the rest of your life, I hope.
For the record, he's right. I don't remember what color shirt he was wearing. But back to class. I mean, you have a good point. And I've noticed that that's happening more and more as I get older, that I'm retaining less inconsequential information.
Yeah, it has to prioritize, right? Like you only have so much attention. You need to figure out where it's best used.
So not remembering something like the color of Richard's shirt is just my brain doing some basic housekeeping, like dusting. Works for me because there's precious real estate in my melon. Okay, well, what happens when the brain starts to age? Because I think a lot of people think, oh, I'm forgetting things more often. Like for me, I'm always forgetting where I put my phone or my glasses. And, I think a lot of us want to know what's normal when it comes to an aging brain versus when should we maybe ask a physician about this?
No, it's a great question. And as you say, it's something a lot of people worry about. From the research, it seems like there are normal age-related cognitive declines that happen around 40. But, it could shift at different rates in different people. There's a few areas of cognition that we could think about. One is processing speed, how fast we can take in new information and respond to it. Mm-hmm. There's crystallized intelligence, which is basically all the knowledge that we accumulate, that we learn through our life. This includes stuff like vocabulary, your knowledge and skills, basically things that you've learned over time, like through your education, through your life experiences. And this is something that can get better with age. One interesting thing is it's not just crystallized intelligence that's better, but, there's this idea of wisdom with age, right? You might be slower at processing new information, but there's some studies that suggest that older people are better at prioritizing, paying attention to things, ignoring distractions than younger people.
That makes sense.
Maybe because you don't have the capacity to pay attention to 20 things at once, so you don't need to. You figure out that, there's only a few things I need to prioritize.
Oh, I love that.
That's another way of adapting too.
Right. There's also sort of an evolutionary lesson there in terms of as you get older, it's you know what really matters. And just because our brains are becoming more efficient at remembering the things that are important, it doesn't mean that we can't develop new neural pathways.
Our brains are still plastic, which means that it's able to change our connections, to strengthen ones that we want to keep, to get rid of ones we don't want to keep. And that's the basis of learning.
Okay, so the brain is plastic. We can make new connections and pathways. We can always learn. These neurons, though, are a finite resource. When they naturally prune off with age or die because of a disease or injury, they don't come back. But there is an exception.
There are new neurons coming in to at least the hippocampus. It's one of the few special areas where there's still neurogenesis, creation of new neurons. And that sort of makes sense for making new connections, new memories.
Yeah.
But I will also add that, the number that are made there is relatively small compared to the billions that are already here. But it's, also shows that we have another way of adapting.
Well, no, that's really great to know. It makes me think I don't have to give up hope.
Never give up hope. Even without this, don't give up hope.
You know what, Richard, all this talk about growing new neurons and pruning the old unnecessary connections to help us prioritize stuff, that kind of reminds me of my garden.
Oh, nice.
Every single morning, I'm, deadheading and pruning because it does require that level of maintenance. But it amazes me that every morning I'm oh, wow, they're more dead flowers to sort of trim off. And then the next day, there are new ones blossoming. And I'm just this makes me think. So these are the neurons.
I mean, it's actually a really beautiful analogy for what our brain is doing. We're trying to figure out how to cultivate the most healthy garden of our mind.
how to continue cultivating that brain garden as we get older, and deciding whether forgetting where I placed my keys despite having a designated key hook is a regular part of aging. After the break. Welcome back. Thanks to our resident brain expert, Richard Sima, we've got a quick primer on how our brains make and strengthen connections. But as we age, our brains start to change. In 2022, an international group of researchers published a brain growth chart in the science journal Nature. This data basically analyzed over 124,000 MRI scans of brains ranging from a 16-week-old fetus to people who are 100 years old.
First, this shows that, our gray matter, where the neurons are, peaks around 6 or 7 years of age. And second is that the white matter, which are the connections between neurons, peaks around 29 years old.
Wait a minute, so are you saying that I've already peaked? Basically, I peaked when I was like 6 and when I was 29 and that's it? Like, ever since then, there's just been a slow decline in brain power?
Well, it's also it's interesting, right? Because these numbers are averages, right? In early childhood, things are a little more regimented. There are developmental periods. But as we age, it just becomes very individualized. So these are averages. Yeah, I won't say 30, you're done. No, definitely not.
It's all downhill from there.
That's definitely not the case.
He's right. It's not the case. Through various points of our lives, brain matter in different regions changes in volume and density. And over time, our brains do naturally shrink. But that doesn't necessarily mean they get worse.
As we age, neurons are dying, which, are in the gray matter. And as they die, it means the gray matter shrinks, causing our brains to shrink. And so on brain scans, you'll see more space between the folds and the grooves of our brain. And there might be changes to our white matter, which is the connections between neurons. And there's a natural amount of that happens.
Basically, research has shown that as the gray and white matter shrink, our brains might not be getting the same amount of blood flow or be as efficient at making those electrical connections as it used to, which translates to potential decreases in our cognitive powers, slower word recall, lapses in memory, trouble multitasking, that kind of thing. But there is a line to be drawn.
So there is what's considered healthy aging, and a bit of shrinkage doesn't mean that you're going to be negatively impacted and you're still able to, go about your day-to-day life and solve the problems you need to solve, do the fun things you want to do.
Sometimes if I'm at a party and I see somebody and I know I've met them more than once and I can't remember their name, that bothers me. And I might eventually remember it, but still, is this normal?
Yeah, it sounds like normal lapse of being a human. That's not perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, that's totally normal to forget some things because you prioritize the information you hold on to.
In other words, small lapses are totally fine. After all, your brain is prioritizing what really matters. A 2001 meta-analysis of age-related cognitive decline showed evidence that processing speed, which is how quickly you can process new information and respond to it, and memory performance all tend to decline. And that is just part of normal aging.
It's also important to remember that, about 40% of people over 65 do have memory impairments that come with age, but that doesn't mean, they will develop dementia. Actually, most of them don't. So what matters for the distinction with just regular, run-of-the-mill memory lapses versus dementia is that dementia is really severe. It's preventing us from living our day-to-day lives, and it's something that progresses. It makes it hard for you to do what you want to do in your day-to-day life. So Alzheimer's is one that most people are familiar with because it's the most common form of dementia. It accounts for about 60 to 80% of dementia cases. But there are other types of dementia, such as vascular dementia,
which I learned is the second most common form of dementia and is typically the result of cardiovascular conditions that could affect your brain, like strokes or type 2 diabetes, anything that causes inflammation. Some risk factors for dementia are out of our control, like genetics. But the good news is that about half of dementia cases may be preventable, even if it runs in your family. And these are all centered around things you can modify, like diet, not smoking, not drinking too much, staying physically active and socially engaged. Richard shared some ideas that he liked.
I love rock climbing. I love going out in nature and hiking and seeing beautiful places. I love playing board games with my friends.
Keep this in mind, pun totally intended. We'll be digging into more things we can do to protect our squashes over the next couple of episodes. Right now, here's our recap of this first class. The human brain is always adapting, whether it's forming new neural pathways or pruning not so valuable information. The brain also changes in volume and density throughout various points in our lives. And once you hit 40, it's normal to start forgetting things. But remember this, your brain is retaining the most important stuff, okay? So your deep arsenal of 90s movie references may be replaced with remembering your kids' multiple pickup schedules. The most common form of dementia is Alzheimer's, followed by vascular dementia. The good news is close to half of dementia cases are potentially preventable, even if it runs in your family. You can minimize your dementia risk by making a few changes to your lifestyle. That's in our next class. We'll hear about adults at risk for cognitive decline and dementia, and what happens to their brains after they started making some lifestyle changes. Try This is produced and hosted by me, Christina Quinn, and Taylor White. The show's editors are Thomas Liu and Kanya Krit von Kitkajorn. Additional editing by Renita Jablonski. Charlotte Freeland is our video editor. Darren Taylor is our motion graphics editor. Sound design and mixing is by Ted Muldoon. Theme music is by Catherine Anderson. Show art is by Kati Huertas, with design editing from Christian Font and Greg Manifold. 2 things before I sign off. The second one is a way to keep learning and for me to learn from you. First, as always, if you're listening when this is newly released, the next episode will be out next week. In this case, specifically on Thursday, October 30th. But you can hear all the classes right now and ad-free with a subscription to The Washington Post. You just need to connect your Post subscription to Apple Podcasts. The easiest way to do that is to go into Apple Podcasts and look up the Washington Post channel. Now, on to the second thing. The things I learn in working on the show really do change how I think and do things day to day. So I also want to hear from you. Tell me what you took away from our course and what you do to keep your brain fit and sharp. Record a voice memo or send me a note at trythis@washpost.com. Please be sure you give me your whole name and how you spell it. The email address again is trythis@washpost.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll meet you in our second class.